The trouble that went back had occurred, yes, I think in the 1950s, 40s, 60s, 70s. I had heard them, glimpses of them, decades, the eras, the centuries in her words. I was convinced that was the period, those, in which, through which I must take her to search. That was when the fashion for the categories in universities of classifying individuals and human beings in and using it as the determinant for their definition of what they were. The concept of a definition of people was the trouble. The ID, the identity, the idea of an identity was created. The idea that a person was an abstract identity, a concept, was the way that people were controlled in the 1960s, particularly. That was the method of control that was introduced and classified, and in boxes people were ticked off and put. These were the coffins. That was the coffin, the energy section rectangular around me that imprisoned me. I was sure, and her, with her. Yes, it was the concept. The idea of a concept pretending to be a person, a human being that murdered and killed each individual, each person, everyone on the planet in that system of thought. That was the spear, the Christ figure, the wound. That was the death, because everyone's energy was focused on measuring themselves and putting themselves in a coffin, a box, and being sent over here and over there, just like a judge in the circuit court now is managed by the committee of managers and sent there, around, over there, around the country. Yes, the trouble went back, occurred. That's the kind of thinking that has trapped creativity and potential. To release it, I would use hyperbole. Of course, I realise now that that was the strategy. What it did when you made people reliant on getting a box in which to be ticked off in, they then wanted to be the best box, the top box, better than the other boxes, elitist. Yes, the strange effect of it all was that when you divorced one from one's own original self, one's own origin, one's own line of ancestry that really defined you by your DNA, your family down through the ages produced you, and that was your true identity, surely. When you were divorced from that, you cracked up. And that was the idea of the control order for the world by thought. Using this concept, people's memories were their original DNA, family, product, ancestral characteristic was blinded and erased. For some reason, the effect of that made them passive. They then became reliant on a role player, a provider. Yes, this case, freelance state. And well, if you were raised, for example, take an island in the north there, yes, the north west end, that was Britain once. Well, if you were raised of British or English or Scottish or Irish characteristics, of Celtic, the people just over the couple of generations' memory of the characteristics that were their own faded, and their speech was broken. If you can break speech, culture, you can break people. That was it. That was it. It was misspeak. Yes, idiot speak. if you can create stick speak, it was sort of moron speak, stuck against the body, yes, and make it crumpled and cringing and weak, a cross stuck through its back, and the person bumbles along as if carrying it with him on his back, like a scarecrow, a crumbling robot, and a hunchback of Notre Dame, Our Lady, seeking her energy from which he can find the line that is his true line, and who he is and his characteristics. For the family DNA somehow gives the power. But the power is impeached and dispossessed if your characteristics are lost. And the idea was through guilt and not belonging to the group. Each individual was then made to assign his self, his soul. That word's no longer used now, of course. His mind to this concept, this box, this abstract box, and assume he was that or he is that, and put himself in it like Michael Cameron and become the coffin. Yes, or Mary Cameron, who refused to do it. And the memory of the line of the Scottish, in that case, was stamped on the front of the coffin, like a memory of the front of the mind, a hyperbole, a metaphor for him to remember and try to ooze out and ease out of this abstract concept that he'd been told was he. He was, inverted commas, an Australian, for example, an American, a British. Well, what did that mean, close inverted commas? Oh, brackets were a few words back. Nothing. It meant giving up your characteristics of your original ancestry and becoming the same. A group, or at least trying and being given concessions by those who proclaimed that they were it. The perfect Australian, for example. The perfect person. The Blairite perfect regular kind of guy. And no one was it. Each was its own characteristic, its own family. But when you aped or copied or define and provide, you became a copy, a coffin. You had your own coffin, your script for your role in which you played a job, and you were defined as a ID, a soul, a human flesh feeling person with jelly and radar and transmission potentials and inculcations, was massacred and shattered and blackened and became just a shallow, superficial idea of an abstract Freeland, World Freeland Order member. There in the map, as he looked, he saw that there were sections and islands, and the ones that had been America and Australia and Asia and Moscow and Russia and England and Britain and France and Africa had all emerged, all amassed, a match. They were all a match. That was it. That was what he was trying to see when he looked at the map and looked at the potential. Each area was a match. Each area was the same. All the pigment, all the different colours had gone. They'd all become pale white, for example, on the map. And as he looked again, he saw that, yes, they were all the same. Sometimes they blended and became a different shade, but they were all the same. So this genetic pattern had been neglected and perfected in each individual capacity had been abrogated and proclaimed a law in the righteous, correct way to administer and patrol and be. And it was a new dawn, and we were all happy and wonderful, and yes, everything was done for us. I looked and I saw they were all brain dead, drunk. They had endless sex. They had beautiful women, each other, Amazons, some of them. Some of them had them, yes, and they had wine women and song, and the women had men. All the women had perfectly formed, gorgeous, I suppose they would call them, film star types of, like, the number one pin-up boys and girls in the world, young women and men. And yet when I looked at them and came up close on the vision of the telly, I saw they were hollow. They were hollow. They were all hollow, sandy-haired, beautiful, sun-tanned, perfect figures, everyone, all of them in every single sector, and yet they sat beside the swimming pool, dangling their hands and fingers in them, and could hardly move. Some moved their lips, a smile, and their eyes, some eyes were bewildered. Nothing much moved, there was no motion. Everyone was dead, and I saw they were the Martians. They were the Martians. But then suddenly an Air Force plane crashed into the swimming pool and blew it to part reams. A new word it was, split down the middle. Apart and smithereens had been joined together, and now we had words saying apart means. And it blew everything to bits. The swimming pools shattered, the bricks, the mortar, But then I saw the plane stuck in the square of the water, and the pilot got out, but the side of the swimming pool, the man still sat dangling his hand in the water, and he didn't make any movement at all. The plane hadn't even affected him, even though it had smashed close. So nothing even died. Nothing much changed. The plane had smashed, but then regrouped and regathered, and it was there like a perfect... Yes, all that could be heard was noise. Occasionally in the distance I heard a volley, but no one stirred. It was as if nothing died anymore. Everything was the same. It was as if death had taken a holiday. And everything just was present, settled. The grass was green around the trees. The water, the swimming pool reformed. I saw the man take a cup of coffee. He picked up his glass, it clinked, and he drank. Yes, there was plenty. I looked around, I saw sugar and bananas and plantations. Everything was colour magic. But there was another volley on the horizon. I began to think that something was slowly being dismantled, but the pilot, he'd disappeared. He'd walked off. He'd warned him. He'd warned off himself. He'd chastised himself. Lightly, when he got out of the plane, he walked off carrying his helmet, and then he went behind a screen, and then he came back out with a producer and a director, they called themselves, and a loudspeaker, and they were a casting director. There was one, and they rounded up a few fellows, a few extras, and then, I see, and then behind it was a building, and up on top of the sign was, my God, it said Warner Brothers. Yes, it was a flashback to the 1950s. All were being defined. I went up there and I looked and I saw a script, and it had the characters and the boxes, and everyone was ticked off, and it just had casting directors, roles, characteristics. Speaks. S-P-I-K-S. Speaks. So it had the designation of what everyone says. The pilot, the type, what he would look like, what he would wear, the suits, the black suits and the grey suits of the 1960s, and the narrow ties and white shirt. There it was all the same. And next to it, it had inverted commas, men, close inverted commas, man, and that was what they would wear. That. Then it said down below, that defines a man. His clothes. They are his measurements for the picture. But the picture was the future, and the future had come. So that was what a man was. I see, he wore a white shirt and tie, and he was short haircut, and that was his measurements. That was a man. And a woman? Well, I hadn't seen. I saw. It said 1960s short skirt. Right. 1970s slightly longer. 1980s some slightly longer. Some risen right up. I see. And a blouse. I see. This close fitting and breast showing. I see. Long hair. Blonde. I see. Promote. It said next to the script. And I saw. Right. This was the producers. The producers' building. That's right. Down there, way down below, was the man dangling his fingers and hand in the swimming pool. He was in his swimming costume. He, as I said, had a perfectly bronzed figure, but he was hollow. He could hardly... Well, he didn't speak. He could hardly speak, and I started to hear in the distance the ambulance coming. But why? Well, each played roles. It came and it stopped and it took him in. He didn't move. They picked him up and just put his body, as it was, sitting up, into the ambulance, drove him off. He came up here, up the winding road to casting director area. They took him out. They put on a hat, a cap this time, drove him back, put him next to the swimming pool. This time he sat in a chair. And the plane, it was revved out and taken back, tail first into the atmosphere and dived down on him again, and they filmed. A film rolled, and I see, and then they took it out and they presented it in a screen over the area, and it said newsreel, and there it showed them. And then, as I stayed here each night, they repeated the newsreel each night, and over it again. Over and over it again ran. It! No one could speak properly in this world. No one. Newsweek, they'd been broken up. They'd been schizophrenic in terms of sound and voice and box. So, still there was no one else. So I now got the knowledge that everyone in these sectors had been killed. There was just this fellow in a plane, a flight, a pilot, and he was just taken up into the skies and attacked, smashed into the... And then up on the screen it was put, and each night ran this newsreel. There was some voices up in the casting building, and they seemed to be drinking, and glasses were clinking, and balls were being held, and I saw ball gowns they wore, but they weren't the people of the 1940s and 50s. They were new beings, and they wore these clothes of the 40s, but they couldn't speak anything. They spoke newspeak. Speak, and they didn't take any notice of the great drive sort of screen outside. It was called a drive screen, and over the swimming pool, but the man who sat next to it was in profile now. When I looked, didn't take any notice of it also. And the plane was quiet. It was parked on the side of the swimming pool, but the newsreel ran, and there was a voice going, a soundtrack accompanying it, and this, I suppose these were today's roles. A man in a swimming costume looking, it said, ideal. Absolutely was said. I could hear that. All I could hear over and over again up in the director's area at the top of the building was the word absolutely. Glasses clinked again, and voices tittered and giggled, and there were. I peered closer. There were people made up, makeup, coffered hair, coiffured hair had coffined. It was the women had perfectly combed hair and makeup on their faces. It was plastic, and glued on was this lipstick and white powder and eyelashes. They looked like they were dolls painted, and they looked like they were just props, propped up on a stick and just turning, and their breasts were stuck out and protruding, and they were sticking it into the men's face, who were almost cupping their chins in it, and then leaning back in their suits and dinner suits that were black. And I thought one who seemed like a producer and was perfect. He was short, blonde haired, and absolutely perfectly lined profile, was going to ash a cigarette in her cleavage. It's not an ashtray. And then I saw that he flicked it out the window. He said, "This is no longer fashionable. This is," and there was a sound from there was a sound from winning. That was a new word, he said. Winning, and it seemed to turn his head. Winning, and like a bee, a winning. I was sure he was turning into a fly, a bee, a winning, he said. And I thought he was going to fly out and just pirouette at 1,000 revs and miles an hour out the window and follow the cigarette and retrieve it and eat it and gloat on the nicotine. But then, no, there he was. I'd imagined it. The people they were. These were the people of this century. And there they were, all the sectors, the sector in the northwest and the others, the different tribes, sectors. They'd been all blended. They'd been all negated. They'd been all pacified and passive, because they'd forgotten their tribal characteristics, and eventually it was just a faded memory, and they loped along like cattle and roamed and became just a reactor. They just reacted. Food was over here. They reminded me of the cattle I had once on the farm scene with Carol. The cows. But they were romantic then, and now they were people, us. They walked over, but the Martians were the people in the casting director area also. Yes, they all were. Had they taken a reaction against this malaise, this way they were? Had the Martians attacked themselves? This Svengali, yes, that's what this whole energy was, of sterility. Yes, this new world order was just dead. And the people who ran it, well, there were hardly any. They'd flogged it, gone on. Once in the beginning, of course, they'd said they were rooting out the dead wood just a bit, and the people had just not even. They turned away ignorant. That had been done, and then because the role players needed. No one is ever happy. It's just selfish. Yes, another area will do. Will do you. It was noticeable that the individuals were taken for the people doing it, particularly the old president, he had pointed out and taken note of gone out of his way to say that individuals who'd realised their potential and sacrificed and suffered and gone hungry for many a day, really, you didn't do it, he said. I've got news to you, you hadn't done it. Yes, the government did it for you. But of course the president had never done it himself as an individual. He'd never had his own business. He'd never taken the trouble to do the sacrifices, so he was jealous. He was jealous. So that fueled a great deal of this grabbing, this land grabbing, this taking, and that was done. It was called that it was in our own interest, and it was nationalised and taken over, and then it was golloped and swallowed. Golloped up and swallowed. And then the state, as it's swallowed and golloped up, its stomach grew bigger and wider and developed, and it became large and overweight and sloth and slobbish, and it expanded out so that it took the other states and just golloped them up and swallowed, and eventually the whole world was golloped up within it, and the world. It was the whale. Jonah was in it, and Joan was within it, the co-pilot. They were two. A new golloped up individual became, yes, like Plato said, joined at the hip. That's why at the beginning we had male-female. Yes. So there was just an elite now, a president and a few people, not many. The pilot, the fellow on the swimming pool, women in the... Yes, and the children were produced by this insemination technique that I have said in the beginning occurred in episode 1 of the original Singing Silver. You see, the Amazons, they were not Amazons in the sense that they were 10 feet tall or 100 feet. They were the same height, 5'8", 5'6", and they perfectly slender, beautiful women like Jan Harrison, I have told. Yes, but they used this one peak, he was called. It was a peak of DNA, and he was frozen in the soil, the ice. I saw him, and he was there, and he was a headquarters, a petrol station. It was a petroleum, huge Castrol area type. That's right, it was called a Kestrel, Kastrel, after the bird, and it fueled down through his stomach. I could see him transparent in the ice, perfectly frozen, the perfect individual of the ancestral. They'd kept him to keep the creative line going, theirs, and he pumped forward involuntarily from the sides, from his back, from his entrails and his solar plex area and his top of his thighs. This energy pulsated, and it was a penis vagina of the male-female original one man. It was Plato joined at the hip, the hermaphrodite, and he pumped the energy forward, and it was a slender, sleek hose that went from the area of the cylindrical and round like a snake and into the vaginal area of the Amazon lady, who lay beautiful there before him on the bed. That's right, in the area, and the others looked on. Richard Marble, the barrister, I could see him in the wig, the gown, the black gown, and the profile, and the face as he turned was I, and he looked at to find and provide, for there was a sign over the area in which this process was going on, and the energy that pumped through from the man in the ice went through, and it became liquid and into the vaginal area and up inside the tube, the whole, the cylindrical area around past the wrinkles of hair in her, as I see, they brought in some others, the men the pilot was there, and then the PM from a certain area who was the perfect man he was brought in also, and they led them to her, and they leant over them and tickled her in a certain area, and she writhed and became excited and took the fuel in and cried out with joy and screamed and she orgasmed, and then she calmed down and she mated with the perfect man, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the pilot, and the regular kind of guy. But they were like cardboard. These two, they were carted out now. They were frames, just cardboard side frames, just propped up and glued on a platform, and they were light, shallow, taken away. Pilot was even the plane I now saw was just a piece of scenery. It was cardboard. It was a drawing of a plane, a fighter, a Spitfire, a Messerschmitt, an old relic from and it attacked. It attacked by just being joined and lowered down by lines, and then the sound was cut in. There was a sound on a some sort of tape recorder camera, and it went and it shot into the swimming pool, and the swimming pool bubbled, and the man sat before it. He was profile cardboard now in the swimming costume and the sandy hair, and he was there light, and he just didn't even notice, and the pump went on and pumped her, the Amazon again, but it was a new goal, and they were trying to pump the DNA into her and have the perfect young girl. I was sure. The elite looked down in the buildings way above. This was the area, the park where I had seen the plane, the flight. The fighter I had flown had crashed, but then it had been winter and it had been snowing, and I crawled out and crawled up into that building. It was grey then, but now it was sunny and bright and green and yellows, and yet this scene had substituted for the other. And it was being filmed and shot and set out and put up on the newspeak on the screen in front of the area. And there people watched, but they were invisible. They'd been invisibilized. They'd been liquidated. They still were harnessed and brought in as pieces as vibrations that sat in chairs and watched and simply paid a fee to go in, and it was collected and taken up to the building, and the hijinks went on up there, and the clinks and the glasses of champagne and wine went on, and they stood in their dinner suits like props and grinned. Their heads went from side to side as they clowned and grinned, and their penises were taken out and fitted into the women whose dresses were held up as they took their knickers down and inserted it and put it in, and like robots just jerked and grated and gyrated, and eventually there was a rehearsal, and then they just pulled them up and took up their drink and continued on and laughed and scored. There was a scorecard up on the door behind the bar, and the scorecard was given, the males were given ratings, and the women laughed and giggled and went on and said, that's a boys' game, I see. And that's what they did round a circle every day. And then when they got tired, they substituted themselves with a copy. It was carboned, a carbon copy. And it was brought in instead, and they went through this mechanical process again, putting it in and having frenetic activity, and then relenting, and then having a glass of wine again, or whiskey. This is what they did. This is the utopia job that I saw in this century, and I could see that this was the way to be. This was the perfect man. This was what you had to aspire to be. If you could be this, you could be a success. You had legitimacy. You had the perfect measurements. You were wonderful. You were an absolute joy. You could be so happy with yourself. And yet, you didn't produce anything. There were no seeds. Nothing. No babies, no child. It was just a mechanical exercise. There above the categories and the ratings behind the bar was the big word SEX. Sex, it said that. So that's what the horse race here was called. Yes, you had to get to the end, won. But there was no need to worry because the game was rigged. You were just given boosters and wires mechanically propped you up if there were any danger that you would sag, both men and women, and that went on. They costumed themselves up, got in costumes. The door behind the bar was the casting area. They came out of that area all dressed up and just jackhammered each other and drank and laughed. And that was it. Praised each other. And it went round and round, and till one day it shattered. But you never saw that because the shattered pieces were taken out. They were extracted and depicted in other areas that were old movies called the cemeteries. Dark, B-grade they were. They put people in cemeteries and dug them down through the tunnels and the hole and into a secret area in a row of coffins, and morgues and profiles were put and words were written about them, made up mostly, but it didn't matter. Who cared? They were dead. They were gone. So the only the child being born was a search, a seek out, it was called, of a product of this DNA that was being done in the rehearsal with the pump which led from the perfect DNA man in the ice to the different women they were trying out in the style and the manner in which I have told, and they would try the perfect man. This was a heist of integrity and authenticity. It was a pose, a poise. It was designed to just fake it and make it up, and after a few goes, a few tries, people accepted that fakery was the norm. It was okay. And maybe it was. It saved a lot of trouble. You didn't have to go out of your way. You didn't have to refine yourself and do anything and measure up and try to go through the sacrifices. I mean, that was old hat. What? Me dig a ditch? Me go and push a broom or go without? You must be joking. I mean, I'm quite prepared to put myself out there as, a good bloke standing for the Aborigines and people who are suffering, and the white folk as well who are unemployed, can't fit in and can't get a box in which to put themselves. A manager, for example, at the top box. But it's just a posture. I don't really expect to have to do anything myself. One day on an assembly line? Are you kidding? Going to university, thanks, the usual teenager would say, and tick a box there, and I'm being classified, and I'm being ID'd, and I'm going in, and that's my constitution, thanks, and I'm doing constitutional law, and I'm going to be like the president of the old republic that was removed, but he's been stored, and he's immortal. He's in the hall of gallows. The hall of gallows? What? Well, if you have a look, you'll find a trapdoor there, and you'll see that it was just a wax marble piece you saw, and over it was the man you're talking about. Have a look. You've been seeing him fade in and out of the whole picture as you've talked and commentated. Look, he's there. He's your Richard Marble. There he was, the barrister with the wig and the long black cape, and he had a jib, and he was a perfect man. His face was tilted up, a little pompous, but as I watched, he was superimposed over the embalmed president of the old United States, and I heard an ambulance in the distance again, and it was coming for him. It's coming to take him away and bury him. A deeply impressed embedded seam of controlled cruelty projected on. I saw it now. It was quite clear. Yes, the pages poured down, and they told me what had happened. The time machine's inner core had developed from nowhere. Yes, I knew. I remembered now. The body had been located. Both had disappeared. The body that had been located had been mutilated in the time machine area. It was unidentifiable. The eyes, sockets, hairline, forehead, fingers, toes, and their nails, prints, and whorls of skins and paws had been bored so that they no longer moved along the spine, along the pine, the tree, the frame of the back of the man, his outline and bearing. Yes, the skull bones and rib cage were closed, and the skull was hollow, hollowed eyes. That was all that remained. But they had found him now. I then heard the rest of the words from the Richard Marble patent statue, sort of cardboard that had been raised up at the peak at the top of the level above the embalmed coffin of which I have told you, and it said as I heard them move him along, "He who lives within me has indwelt since the dawn of time, and he was seed and grown to strangle my life like coils of a rotten branches of a tree withering the leaves." I heard the time machine. The time machine had disappeared, he said, as he went on, commissioning me to cooperate in the crime that created the body's dismemberment mine. I adopted, define, and provide the era, the thinking, the concepts that were mine. They entered every organ and embedded in my area, which the surgeons has surgeoned and operated on. The voice of define and provide, the premier area of which I had stumbled on, the Svengali. It opened its pulse and it spoke like a record, seduced me, a Svengali that was syrup and serum and yet so shallow, and to make me sick and confess I knew, both in this crossover of time, but like a poor cattle that's led to the factory house. I allowed myself to be drawn. I went on. I had such a, senseless, weak knowledge of my identity that I was passive, and I was able to be led on with these beautiful, sweet musical sounds that went on in the area, and I saw chrome-plated gold and tinsel and junk of no substance. The architecture of the building as I went to the entrance, and there embalmed in the coffin at the top was the massive coffin that was eagle's wings, and it said, embalmed, here lies the president, our leader of Define and Provide, who managed to achieve, that's what the words said, achieve by never getting his hands dirty. And gossamer he weaved. Yes, that's what it said. He was duality itself. He represented multi-life, us all, and brought the union alive to itself, and pacified other tribes, and introduced the genetic DNA that dispossessed and used forceps to extract the DNA bits that were characteristic of each life, each family, and throw them away and get rid of them like Anastasia. Annie was done. They managed to get rid of and dispossess the side that was her family line and call her ordinary. Just everyone. Yep. She had no characteristics of her own. I can't speak as I'm giving these last days on earth. I'm standing at one moment, you see, at the window, and then in the studio with my microphone. I'd taken over this area. I'd gotten into this building, and I'd managed to slither up in a pipe, in a stove pipe it was, to the stove, and I managed to ease my way out of the stove, push it over the trays, and Auschwitz was a similar name that was there, but it was a room. I saw it was just a film stage play, a sound stage where they shot pictures and areas, and they gave them, yes, that's right, they reminded us of the terrible things that had happened. That was this area of the soundstage of the building's film studio, and in there I made my way through, and up through the central area there was a cone-like area, a sort of in a cylindrical pipe coil, and I crawled up. The inner ladder was there. There was an inner ladder, and I got up to the small peak, the triangle, the top, in which he was embalmed, and it was gold and dark of night. There was no one there in the whole building. I tapped and knocked and bashed on the wall. I wanted to ask this embalmed man, what is it about? What is it all? And I bashed and bashed, and I knew that he was immortal and wonderful, and I would squeeze and drag over the walls of the coffin, and I knew who I would find in there. I would find the gorgeous, wonderful Richard Marble, and I found... Psycho! A coffin. Ashes. Cold. Black. Streamed through my hand. Just nothing. Just air. A few ashes. So all of this time, this column, this golden column that had been like a phoenix, a phallic projected up here at the top of the head of the building, above the dome, above the party area where there'd been clinks, and I'd seen the drones and fires and all around, but now was clear and tidy and ordered, and perfect parks and lawns and fountains like Versailles, perfectly structured, except I touched it, the wall, and it crumbled apart. It was brass. And the coffin, so also brass started to fall, crumbled to the ground, and there in the ashes I saw an effigy, and it was he. It was the slim, slender he, and he was bald, and he still stuck to the mannequin. The wax model was a suit, a dark black suit, and a narrow black tie, and a white shirt, and a chiselled profile. There were no hairs on his body. I could see, for the flimsy suit you could see through easily. There was nothing there. The thin legs, they were just jelly. This was a complete... Yes, a complete pinnacle of... I looked at his eyes. They were jet black, dead. Just dead. Depicted a slight tweak in his lips and face that seemed to curl up for a moment, as if the artist or whoever sculpted caught him in a sneer. A little sneer, a slight, but in the eyes there was a slight twinkle of bewilderment and confusion. The eyes were focused on a television. Television was still on. He was alive inside that statue, watching. Television had sports on. Over and over it went round. Gridiron, throwing ball. Same film, same picture. Occasionally the aircraft cartoon flicked in and attacked, but just shot, and it was just a noise, but nothing was hurt or heard other than that noise, and then back to the sports. The statue's eyes seemed alive. I was shocked to think that there was someone inside. How many years had he been here? This top pinnacle monument of a embalmed golden gold braid coffin, peaked at the miniature area at the top. He was staring. Sports flickered. Eyes. I knocked on the side of the statue. Hi, anyone in there? My God, don't tell me you're... Is anyone in there? Are you buried alive? Eyes blinked quickly. Yes, eyes blinked quickly. They looked at the television. There was a slight shoulder movement. Slight, I knew, a twitch. I could see it, and the eyes blinked and still looked at it, and I saw him looking at the sportsman, the gridiron player. Yes, head didn't move. It was cement, paralysed in the statue, and then I saw the eyes roll. The eyes opened a little, blinked. He was trying to send me a message. He was blinking. He was trying to communicate with me, blinking through the television. I went over to the gridiron player, looked at the screen, and I saw what in his eyes. Anguish. The ball was just being bounced, going back and forward. It wouldn't move, get any progress, go on, and the plane attacked again, and suddenly there was an extra frame and a cut to children screaming. They were all black and white, screaming and running and racing at my lay, and now screaming, and the aircraft was diving, and I looked closer in it, and I saw the figure was the embalmed eye. Statue crashed from the top. just down to the floor, shattered of its own accord. Smashed. There inside was a sort of a liver, I thought first, or a sort of an organ. And then when I looked closer, I saw it was completely innocuous. It was completely sanitized. It was completely clean and just sterile and formed. And I saw it was a heart. And the heart was just an object. It was just an object. A demonstration for the museum. Actually, you can hear now. I thought it was the ambulance, but it was the police. They came in with two men. White coats, ambulance men, doubling up and doing other roles for the... Well, there was... for the peopleless dictatorship that was just land and now dead. And they took this object and the shattered pieces and the heart away. And I remembered back in the beginning, the boy had come in another day to the museum. And this is what he had said. The master, as he had watched him. Yes. A heart. Loaded, taken away, thrown into the back of the ambulance, and it was dead, but just a piece of clay, really, moulded together again by the sculptor and artist who'd done the picture for the others another day. And this spaceship had come back, and we'd made our way through, hacked our way through the greenage, and come to this museum, this strange dum 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 dum. It's when I'd seen her, Jan Harrison, Jane. What's in a name? They were all the same, beautiful. But when I knew them, they were individual, soul. And that was what was abrogated by the proclaimed legislation of this day. And that is why it had folded and fallen, taken the president with them. This soulless, desolate dissertation, this area, this desert, was like an oasis that was beautiful, but clay. And this heart, I was taken into the museum another day, and there I saw behind the window glass pane this heart, this great heart. It was a replica now, built up like a whale, and it was plastic. Yes, I could see it, and underneath the label said in block letters of Freeland, "This is the heart of Freeland. This is the heart that was proclaimed, the symbol that stood for it." It was a symbolic visual that was used by the leader to cycle and get people working for the state. And it was... There the words faded. They trailed off. I couldn't quite see them or read them, and I don't think there was a word in the dictionary these days, for on earth everybody was happy, and they went about doing their individual things and realising their gifts, and everyone loved their neighbour and was great and content, and the sun's rays shined down on them, and we had a good government, a great government that worked for us. People were happy and generous and grateful. And this era that we looked at in the museum, the children were looking now. I saw them, and there were all the mothers with them, and they're 19. It's interesting. They're 19. The girls were with them. The teenagers. They were happy, and there was an innocence, an open face that knew no side and was not conniving and tricking and trying to hide. And they got on well together. The stream outside flowed past, and the trees were coming right down to the edge, to the water, and the cool water that which everyone swam. Yes, this was the era, and I tried to make out the last words as I gleaned through the glass, but it was a little smudged now. I must tell the attendant. Hey, Jack, Jim, old boy, come on over here. Hello, Bill, how are you? Yes, fine, yeah. What are you doing? Oh, God, I was a lawyer one day. Yep, retired the next, tried to get out of it, come to the museum, and I knocked over that bloody statue there, and it's nearly smashed. Ah, yes, but I know, I raced and caught it before you did. There's nothing in it. There's no harm. Well, we found it once. It's an old 2000, 3000, 4000 Roman bath. Yes, that we took on, and we opened it and found a little tape recorder, a minute chip, a transistor, and we've kept it. Yes, I'll play it one day if you want to come into the back room. It's there, but this O sort of, there's an O on it. Yes, it's a circle. They went round and round and couldn't solve anything in that era. It's known as the era of the black knowledge, the darkness. But never mind, you've got to have dark to have light in the world and enlightenment. And, we can't be great and be the pride of it all, can we? No, definitely. But I'd like to come into that room and listen to what you've got to say there on that tape, just for historical reasons. I was an archaeologist once, so I tried to be that, and yep, well, my wife was a mannequin. She was a Hollywood film star. Way back in those days in the former transmigration. You remember, it's all acknowledged now, the transmigration of Sol, the Egyptian, and yes, well, this transistor's interesting because it's got that in there, but inside this statue was hollow. And we found this, and we'll play it again. It works. It's rusty, but it works. It's got a cracked, broken voice on it, like a broken, cracked 78 record, scratched and broken, and hisses and like a snake hissing. It's quite off-putting, actually. Some find it offensive, but you ought to listen to it. It's interesting. It's just, write it down. Take a stenographer. Take Patricia. She's your secretary. You had at work. She's still around now. Ask her. She got in touch with you. I'll do that. Okay, right. But what's the word? I'll have to get her to write it down in shorthand. This alien word that he wrote that was embalmed in this statue. What's it say there? I can't quite read it, but it says, it's got a little, I'll have a look, said the attendant. I've got a trained eye. It says a little F. French? No, it's not French. It doesn't mean French. It says F, little FASC. I can't read it now. It's trailed off. It's just ground into the chalk. Look, like Prince's, the hotel that was there, ground out. They ground it into the dust. They don't want to leave any trace of it. I'll try and see. There were others. The Jews, the line. I see, says Scots, French, Celt, Anglais. Yes, it's got a line here. It's all written in this trace. You can trace it down with a scratched pencil, a piece of graphite or a lead, yeah. Just do that on the... Yeah, that's it. See? Scratch it down. It's like a throat going down. My God, it's revealing a map. Map of the throat of a person. It's like a human cortex. Yes. There it is. It's projecting out. My God, look at it. The words, they're flicking out. They're projecting onto the glass here. I can see a face. My God, it's a face of Christ. That picture. He was a man back in... Look at the wreath. Look at it's forming now. The long, sweaty, black hair. He's staring as if a head in a goldfish. My God, it's like he's had his head, a face decapitated and put in a bottle to preserve, so that... What is it like? It's like Banquo's Macbeth. Curtain. Move it across the exhibits and fossils in the museum. Let's get out of here. It's too much to bear. It was an age-old era of define and provide. It was a era without knowledge. Banal, I'm afraid. But now we've got our culture, and the joy of each one is different and interesting. And okay, Jack, Bill, Moira, come over here. Yeah, and Shirley, yeah. There's Merle. Come on, let's go over, and Arthur and Sherry, and let's all have a barbecue. Yay! Da-da-da-da-da! You have been listening to the Define and Provide era. That was recorded in a transistor, and there is more on the transistor if you are interested in finding what happened in that era. I wanted to get inside, to know her spirit, the Liz Fraser. Beyond Define and Provide, the crumbled coat persona crumbled, hollow, weak, fell down. Transistor. I found the transistor. Play it. Quick. Play it. Turn it on. It's got a film. Quick, look. It's showing what was within, behind the crumble. Yeah, behind the mug. The face shot, the beer mug. It's behind the pirate. I could see a way which was a means to access a thoroughfare by which I could take over authority and usurp the secret of Magdalene. I turned the switch on. The mother's jewellery was worth millions. It was the brooch that lay at its centre in the middle where the area was with the actual layer above. I had to discover the safe. The safe was the round, narrow bit, the piece that set perfectly inserted itself in the middle, in the doors between the slit where there were on each side, two sides, the flaps, the slats of which I have told you, which flew in this middle area, of which was the tool that went round and whirred and created the magic, the music, the motion that flew the machine. Let the rocket spear straight up into the atmosphere. This was the mother's jewellery, but it was worth millions. The brooch, it was the brooch that had lain in its centre. I had discovered the safe in which I believed all was held. All this battery area, this electricity, it sparkled and fissured, and the wires and cords, the umbilical lines were connected, and there, the whereabouts of the brooch had revealed. I could finance the serum I required to dilute the plastic heart. Let it breathe and beat. That is why I am Richard Marble. As I breathe, I made my claim. I stretched my hand forth and put my finger in, inserted it, and opened the doors, the flaps of the plane, the wings. I turned the page and the pirate machine scrolled, downloaded the messages. The message, yet located the diary. There it was. I saw it through the panel that separated, and it operated in the area of a two-way mirror. Behind it I saw the lounge and bedroom. It was behind the slab. The statue had turned, the miniature, at the bottom, and there it was, this other cavern, this room, this apartment that was perfectly formed, that was hers. Louise had said, the Odyssey. And I had heard a voice of Emily He who will find the diary is worthy. I had found it now. A pirate machine. It was what Emily had said to me when as Lola, and she had turned the faces, the eyes, the snake eyes that I had seen, clicked over into different shades. When I'd questioned her, she continually, at one time, refused me information, but now she was open and she gave it freely. I put the letter down. I had been reading it for all these days, all these hours, into this microphone. There before me stood Emily. That's what the next line of the letter said now. Yes, and Suzanne, the twins. She turned her head, the head in Lamar's side, and said, I have everything to live for. Now, I use my authority, the crown, to enter you. I used a pretext, a text I sent you first, a prelude to tell you of the Amazons and the girls. It was further evidence the other day. Do you not remember the plans? I revealed myself as well. You remember? I dressed up as James Devine, for example, for you. Slacks and you like that top hat, that racing gear I used to wear when I was married to you. Yes, in the mansion. Do you not remember before you suicided and disappeared? I went into the room. Here it is. This is here. This is here. You can see it now. The tower. It's Suzanne's, and Louise lives here. Yes, you see, this suicide, it was a mime. You created it in order to move on and get the old order behind. The new world order of define and provide was stymieing you, and you created a simulation of a suicide in order that you could crack it and fracture it and get rid of its influence and tyranny and hold on you, and it's converting you into a representative image of everyone else in it, particularly the Prime Minister and Cabinet, and you rolled on. That was what the play was, the rehearsal. Do you remember? Here's the script. I plan to reveal myself. Do you see? Take the serum, the Y line. It conveyed my personality and spirit from Richard Marble to James Devine, and automatically reverted back and swung from each one in the alternation of time. The constant escapade could be carried up forever and a day. I went up and down this area, this slope, and came down in this different guise. The actress I was for you. Sometimes I played the line of James Devine. It was simple. You were asleep and awake at the same time too, and I stood before you, perfectly groomed. You're funny, you know, James. For that's who you are. I simply mirrored you and all your personalities back to you so you could do. She laughed. The map. You have it now. It was in the diary, remember? At the back, at the annexures. You proved worthy. James Devine, you tried to kill his personality, convert into someone else roles that would work, and they don't. You have to be yourself, not others. Don't attach yourself to anyone else and ape and mimic their characteristics until they become a habit, like the PM did with Margaret. I won't go on, it's so long ago, it's many aeons, and no one remembers now, but that is what the schizophrenic was. It causes a crash. No one can do it, run the obstacle course, unless they identify and trust themselves. When they identify with Margaret or Churchill, they wreck the world and splash all their lack of confidence actions on everyone else, especially the children. And that's who have died. And that's the negative black magic of define and provide. But the world, the ambiguity of identity, it creates this corpse in the trial. The day was 7 years before the end. You took under the will. It's simply a matter of producing it and making it a reality, and then send the details out and others can take. The children who were suffering and suffered artificialities and limbs and who died will receive in the karmic boomerang that will work now because of your pledge to redeem. It's redeemed, your pledge. You can take the cross down now. Hear the... They stopped. There they are. They're taking it down. They're breaking the wood up. Yes, it's stopping. It's stopping. The clock. It's stopping, and the diary, the pirate machine before you that's open. It tells you what happened, and you will read. Look. I am trapped in time. That is what the O circling round on the embalmment meant. And look, see what the download is telling you as it presents. You wrote it from your inside, your gut. It sold. Your soul characteristically writhed, and on this cross in this galaxy world where you were seen from afar by the angels and me. Look, because we could read, you wrote. I am trapped in time. He looked to us. He pointed the revolver. Still I am Richard Marble within. The inner conflict is intolerable. I must find myself and get out of this mind that is tormenting me and making me a pretender, a copy of Define and Provide, a joker. I must be either God or Satan. He is mad, I thought. I saw this piece in brackets, even though it had been neglected. The detective had said it, and he was the side of the mind, yours, that was observing you and trying to help you get out of this capsule, this embalmment, this blunt-nosed rocket. They're still taking it down, the cross. The compartments, they're folding it up into compartments. Yes, you wrote this, so I'll just reread it and look in the mirror and you can see it. You said. I looked at the superintendent, but James Devine, stroke paralysed Richard Marble, the conglomeration, contorted child of the monster, said, and I quote, "DJ, my map memory is returning. You have found the diary. The hour is here. The right hand of my watch has stopped, and that of the clock, that is the hand of the left, has crossed, to be interlocked on the anniversary of," and the quote stopped. His voice trailed off. His words. DJ read the diary. A moment of each death as the pendulum swings to ring the bells of the old grandfather chimes of the mansion that is this, the House of Devine, James and Emily and Suzanne and mine, the Marquis and Marquess of Devine, to form a Marquess line of Devine, the feminine, the wholly feminine line from the hammock of Emily's on which she swings. The rightful beneficiary has been found, and it is you. If you identify with your true self, it's you who is reading the diary. The diary came to you in a bottle. Do you not remember? You picked it up and took out the DNA and read it. In the underground stream, it had been. On the island, in the courtyard, in the mirror. If you look at it, it will reflect your image back to you. And in the X-ray, you will see it in the torso solar plexus. It's a map of West Sussex. It matches it exactly. Look, it's where the plane came down and crashed. You were the pilot. Left it in the hall behind the wall when I sealed it up. A diary. I couldn't find it. I couldn't get out. I knew I'd written the route, the words, the route, and I couldn't remember it. My unconscious couldn't focus on it because I was identifying and attaching with Margaret and Winston when I crashed and bombed her. When I was a pilot. The children, I have to admit it, the terrain, I didn't mean it. I swooped and I tried to, I fired over them, I'm sure, but others, they were dead and I died. I worked innocent, but I've walked this land and said for 10,100,000,000 years, it seems, I've cut my throat myself in this suicide in the mirror as I shaved, and I saw my eyes and they were bloodshot, hemorrhaging, and the cancer was killing me for what I did in the... or didn't do, as I sat by and watched define and provide. What was that Errol Flynn said when he went to Spain? I got out of there when I realised they were real bullets and I couldn't yell cut. It was the Spanish Civil War. He went to there.